Hi Founder fans, Jason here. Welcome to Founder of the Day Read Along. We are now looking at Federalist number 13. We're going a little bit late in the day today. That's alright, this is a fairly short one. It's really only 4 paragraphs. 2 of them are super lengthy paragraphs, I'll allow, but and 2 of them are extremely short. So we'll go through it to see how it feels, and then tomorrow we'll move on to number 14. I was almost going to do 2 in one sitting, with 13 being so short, but 14, like I said, is a little bit long, so we'll save that for tomorrow. That is my computer letting me know we are live, and let's get right into it. Whoops. Wrong screen. Not playing trivia today. That was trivia screen. We are playing read along. So let's do just that. I am going to pop mine up right here. We are, of course, looking at number 13, the advantage of the Union in respect to economy in government. Kind of a weighty title. This one for the Independent Journal. They seem to be bouncing back and forth between the Independent Journal and the Observer. November 28th, 1787. This one again, our good friend Alexander Hamilton. Allie Hams a lot. So, as always, being addressed to the people of the state of New York. And let's go. As connected with the subject of revenue, we may with propriety consider that of economy. So the last paper Hamilton wrote about was the subject of revenue, raising money, raising tax money. So let's see exactly what he means of economy of government. Hamilton has spoken of economy up to this point, but he was generally speaking about private industry. This time he's speaking of government. So let's see what he's talking about with that next sentence, please. The money saved from one object may be usefully applied to another, and there will be so much the less to be drawn from the pockets of the people. So, it seems like he's saying by economy, he says pretty easily here, even though it's 18th century speak, pretty easy to understand. If you don't spend it here, you can spend it there, and that will save the need for tax money when it comes to the government. If the states are united under one government, there will be but one national civil list to support. If they are divided into several confederacies, there will be as many different national civil lists to be provided for, and each of them as to the principal departments coextensive with that which would be necessary for a government of the whole. So by this, Hamilton is saying, if you have one government, you have these government things to do. But if we have separate governments, we'll have all the same things to do, but over and over again for the separate governments. They will cover the same thing the one government does, but since they'll be done separately, there will theoretically be more of them doing the same thing, or kind of like bureaucracy, and that would be a little bit of a waste. I don't think they would have called it bureaucracy. That's me relating it to a modern audience. The entire separation of the states into 13 unconnected sovereignties is a project too extravagant and too replete with danger to have many advocates. Okay, the reason I'm choked up here is because Hamilton, as we've discussed before, likes to say, hey, look, these anti-federalists want to break it up into separate nations or separate confederacies. Not really anyone was actually advocating for that at the time. Maybe 2 or 3 random people, but primarily and for the most part, they were not. 1 second here. Going to pull that up. Excuse me. Yes. Anyway. Yeah, it's just a little bit surprising that he says this, because no one was arguing for that, and pretty much anyone would have said to Alexander Hamilton, no, we don't want 13 separate unconnected sovereignties. We like the Articles of Confederation. It just needs improvement, bud. So when he says it's too extravagant a project to explain why 13 separate countries would be a problem, it's true, and pretty much everyone he'd be discussing it with would agree. Okay. The ideas of men who speculate upon the dismemberment of the empire seem generally to turn toward three confederacies, one consisting of the four northern, another of the four middle, and a third of the five southern states. So there's not often people discussing, and again, just a side note, anyone watching live, I did just turn George Washington bot on, so if you will be adding up your time for trivia, so keep watching. Anyway, this was talked about at the time by a few people. The idea that it wouldn't be 13 separate nations, but New England would be its own nation, and the Mid-Atlantic would be its own nation, and then everything basically from Virginia south, maybe Maryland south, would be its own nation, and those would be separate confederacies. That idea was floated, mostly by the Federalists in the Federalist Papers, mostly as kind of a scare tactic. As you know, I've been publishing an article and video about a different anti-federalist paper every Friday for over a year, and I am yet to hear one of them say that specifically. Though granted, I am following one author at a time in that fashion, so I've only gotten through, I think, I'm doing Cato now as the 5th one I've gotten to, but, you know, some of them have written a handful of papers, some of them have written like 25 papers, and that's what's taking so long, and I have not seen anyone say this except the Federalists. Again, I will remind you that this is propaganda. He was specifically making publications, Hamilton, Madison, Jay, just like the Anti-Federalists were also promoting propaganda, trying to sway the public on a political opinion. Anyway. Offline. Not sure why. Anyway. There is little probability there would be a greater number. Oh, okay. So he's saying here, no reason to argue about 13 separate nations. There probably wouldn't be any more than 3, even if they broke up into separate nations. According to this distribution, each confederacy would comprise an extent of territory larger than the Kingdom of Great Britain. So America is so big that even if it broke into 3 different confederacies, it would still take up more land than Britain. No well-informed man will suppose that the affairs of such a confederacy can be properly regulated by a government less comprehensive in its organs or institutions than that which has been proposed by the convention. So, a landmass smaller than Great Britain needs a government at least as big as Great Britain, right? I mean, that doesn't really take into account that Britain had colonies all over the world at this point, but nonetheless, when the dimensions of a state attain to a certain magnitude, it requires the same energy of government and the same forms of administration which are requisite in one of much greater extent. So, this is the first time I believe we've heard them use the word energy. And this is something that not only the Federalists use and Hamilton uses a lot, but George Washington used quite frequently in his correspondence when he was using back channels to promote the Constitution. Energy of government, a vigorous government, a government that does things. I know we don't talk about modern politics here, but a large portion of my conservative audience might not be super happy to hear that one of the points of the Constitution was to give energy to a government and have it affect the economy. But very specifically, that was one of Hamilton's goals. And he's saying here that you need to have that certain energy of government to assist in when a nation gets to a certain size. It's just too big, and it needs the government to be helping. And as he says here, it's bigger than Great Britain, even if it breaks into 3 separate nations. So, there we go. This idea admits not of precise demonstration, because there is no rule by which we can measure the momentum of civil power necessary to the government of any given number of individuals. But when we consider that the island of Great Britain, nearly commensurate with each of the supposed confederacies, contains about 8 millions of people, and when we reflect upon the degree of authority required to direct the passions of so large a society to the public good, we shall see no reason to doubt that the like portion of power would be sufficient to perform the same task in a society far more numerous. Don't worry, we're breaking that down. There's a lot going on here. So, This idea, the idea that a certain size of a nation with a certain amount of people needs an energetic government, amidst not of you don't need exact demonstration because there's no rule which can measure the momentum of civil power necessary to the government of any given number of individuals. So we can't say if you have exactly this amount of people, the government needs to do exactly this much. There's no precise number. But when we look at the size of Great Britain, which is about the same size of what each of these confederacies would be if the nation breaks into 3 confederacies, it contains about 8 million of people, which is a little bit larger. The estimation at the time was probably about 3 million living in the young United States. And when we reflect upon the degree of authority required to direct the passions of so large a society to the public good. So we look at the size of Britain, we look about how many people there are, and we look at what that government has to do, we shall see little reason to doubt that the like portion of power would be sufficient to perform the same tasks in a far more numerous society. So, we look at Great Britain, the amount of people, the size of it, and we'll see that you need something similar to what Great Britain's got to control properly the amount of people that Great Britain has in the size of territory that Great Britain has. So, let's be like Britain, essentially, is what all those words mean. Civil power, properly organized and exerted, is capable of diffusing its force to a very great extent, and can, in a manner, reproduce itself in every part of a great empire by a judicious arrangement of subordinate institutions. So, if the civil power, when a government is properly put together, it can use its power to do a wide variety of things and can reproduce itself in every part of a great empire by a judicious arrangement of subordinate institutions. So, when you have a government that's being worked properly, it can have a wide variety of different things going on, and the things it says it has to do with the top, it can do with the bottom because it puts more layers of itself around. I'm not explaining this properly, but essentially you have a federal government, and then you have the state governments kind of enforcing what the federal government's doing. I know that's not how the Constitution works. It's just kind of the example I can use for this. And then you have the local governments enforcing what the state governments have sent down from the federal government. Excuse me. So, just to summarize that first big paragraph. When you have a lot of people, for some reason he's going with the example of the broken apart confederacies. If you break the United States into 3 pieces, it's about the size and not quite the population of Great Britain. And to control this many people, we need to do what Great Britain is doing. And what Great Britain essentially is doing is passing the buck down the chain and having a lot of layers of bureaucracy. He's basically calling for bureaucracy right here to get things done. The supposition that each confederacy into which the states would likely be divided would require a government not less comprehensive than the one proposed, and will be strengthened by another supposition more probable than that which presents us with 3 confederacies as the alternative to a general union. So, even if we broke into 3 confederacies, you're going to need this constitution. It will need to take this form, even if there's 3 separate constitutions for 3 separate confederacies. But he's alluding to it could get worse. So let's see. If we attend carefully to the geographical and commercial considerations in conjunction with the habits and prejudices of the different states, we shall be led to conclude that in case of disunion, they will most naturally league themselves under 2 governments. Okay, so if it were to split into 3 confederacies instead of 1 nation, then what'll really happen is it'll turn into 2 confederacies. Okay, Hamilton. The 4 eastern states, by which he means New England, from all the causes that form the links of national sympathy and connection, may with certainty be expected to unite. So yes, New England is going to stay together. It's New England. They're smaller in size, though not all in population. They have a lot of common. Their industries are similar. Their habits are similar. Although Rhode Island and Connecticut were basically started as people fleeing Puritan Massachusetts, they still have a lot of religious connections there. New York, situated as she is, would never be unwise enough to oppose a feeble and unsupported flank to the weight of that confederacy. Interesting. So New York, situated as she is, would not be unwise to oppose a feeble, unsupported flank to the weight of that confederacy. So because New York is right next to New England, it would be dumb for her to ignore that side. So New York would obviously hang out with New England. There are other obvious reasons that would facilitate her ascension to it. So you get it. Basically, it's what he's saying. I'm not going to explain why New York would get together with New England. You understand it. It's obvious. New Jersey is too small a state to think of being a frontier in opposition to this still more powerful combination. Nor do there appear to be any obstacles in her admission to it. So New Jersey would join with New York and New England because, well, New Jersey was a smaller state at the time. It's really populated nowadays, but at the time it was considered a smaller state. That's why at the Constitutional Convention, the small state plan was called the New Jersey Plan. Although, truthfully, that's because it was led largely by Patterson of New Jersey, but still. Also, there isn't any obstacle. New York would be like, come on, Jersey, get on board. About 100 years, less than 100 years before the American Revolution, New York and New Jersey were shared one governor for a brief period of time. So they do have that history, despite how they behave today. Even Pennsylvania would have strong inducements to join the Northern League. So Pennsylvania, one of the largest, most powerful states in the Union, would have reason to side with the North. An active foreign commerce on the basis of her own navigation is in truth... two big sentences. An active foreign commerce on the basis of her own navigation is her true policy and coincides with the opinions and dispositions of her citizens. So Pennsylvania, because of its international trade and where it's situated, would naturally... the people of that state would naturally want to align with the New York, New Jersey, New England campaign. The more southern states, from various circumstances, may not think themselves much interested in the encouragement of navigation. So he's implying that the states in the South don't seem to care about navigation. They may prefer a system which would give unlimited scope to all nations to be the carriers as well as the purchasers of their commodities. So what he's saying here is the southern states, they produce a lot of goods, and they're happy to accept people into their shores, take what you will, give us money, bye-bye, as opposed to Pennsylvania and everything north, which have a lot of waterways and major port cities that are more concerned with the trade itself as opposed to the products being traded. Pennsylvania may not choose to confound her interests in a connection so adverse to her policy. So, and he's still referring to Pennsylvania, really doesn't have that much economy connected with the South. As she must at all events be a frontier, she may deem it most consistent with her safety to have her exposed side turn towards the weaker power of the South rather than towards the stronger power of the Northern Confederacy. Very interesting. Basically saying Pennsylvania should unite with the North because they're more powerful. Literally, militarily more powerful. He's implying here. By all events must be a frontier. So by frontier, the Western Pennsylvania was the frontier, as was upstate New York, as was Western Virginia, not West Virginia. That was the frontier. It wasn't a state yet. It wasn't even a territory. So he's just really saying why it would be best for Pennsylvania to join the Northern Confederacy, as he's taken to calling it. This would give her the fairest chance to avoid being the Flanders of America. Now, Flanders rings a bell. I don't know exactly the reference he's making. I believe Flanders is a part of the Netherlands Republic, but I'm not sure why he's referencing that. He studied more of Netherlands history than I have, apparently. Whatever may be the determination of Pennsylvania, if the Northern Confederacy includes New Jersey, there is no likelihood of more than one confederacy to the south of that state. So, if New Jersey, so whether or not Pennsylvania joins the North, if New Jersey joins the North, then there's just going to be the North and the South. If New Jersey doesn't join the North, then they're kind of the swing state that would determine whether or not a third middle confederacy would happen. Again, according to Hamilton, this is all kind of random and speculation. Nothing could be more evident than that the 13 states will be able to support a national government better than 1/2 or 1/3 or any number less than the whole. So, nothing could be more evident. Obviously, he's saying that one national government would be easier and better to put into practice and keep into practice and operate appropriately than splitting up into a handful of national governments. Again, he's assuming that if the states don't ratify the Constitution and fall under one national government, then they're going to break up into separate national governments or 13 separate national governments. I guess you could say that technically the states were mini nations, although not even that many. Some of them were the same size as England. But again, he's assuming that if you don't accept our national constitution, you're going to have a different one of your own. Very interesting. This reflection must have great weight in obviating the objection to the proposed plan, which is founded on the principle of expense. An objection, however, which when come to take a nearer view of it will appear in every light to stand on mistaken ground. So here he's saying, if you look at one of the objections of the proposed plan, is that we shouldn't form one nation. That objection should be obviated or gotten rid of because we're going to have these separate... Sorry, I'm speaking... Hi, Colonel, how's it going? I'm speaking very slowly. I want to get it right. When we look at this objection that we don't want a national government, well, Hamilton's saying then we're definitely going to have small national governments that are exactly the same as the Constitution. It's a very peculiar argument. Okay, last little sentence here. Is it one run-on sentence? One run-on sentence. All right, we'll go through it, then we'll break it back down. If, in addition to the consideration of a plurality of civil lists, we take into view the number of persons who must necessarily be employed to guard the inland communication between the different confederacies against illicit trade, and who in time will infallibly spring up out of the necessities of revenue, and if we also take into view the military establishments which it has been shown would unavoidably result from the jealousies and conflicts of the several nations into which the states would be divided, we shall clearly discover that a separation would be not less injurious to the economy than to the tranquility, commerce, revenue, and liberty of every part. Woo! There's a lot going on in that sentence. So in this, Publius. So that's it. What he's doing here is he's wrapping up the last several arguments that he made, not the last several papers. He's kind of skipping over Madison and talking more about him and what John Jay had to say a little bit here. So let's break it down. If, in addition to the consideration of plurality of civil lists, so that was the first point he made in this paper. Civil lists, civil list, he means the things governments have to do. And again, I'm going to reiterate that none of the anti-federalists I've read in detail have yet discussed breaking the nation into separate states. They just wanted to correct the Articles of Confederation. But Hamilton continues to throw this out there, that they want separate states. They want either 13 separate states or 3 or 4 separate little confederacies of states. By they, When I say they, I mean anti-federalists. This is what essentially he's saying. None of them have been saying that. I've not seen one of them say that yet. But what he say here? Plurality of civil lists, as he said earlier in this, we look at what a government has to do. If you have separate nations, then they have to do all the same things separately because governments have to do certain things. But if we come under one constitution, then it's one government doing all these things. It's more consolidated and more concise. Although he also did say that there would have to be layers and bureaucracy to get that done. We also take into view the number of persons who must necessarily be employed to guard the inland communication between the different confederacies. So this is what John Jay was saying in like number 2 or 3, Federalist 2 or 3. If we don't unite under one constitution, then we need a police force, essentially. I forget, John Jay had referenced what they called it in France. I don't remember exactly. Patrols, I think they called it. We would need to hire just thousands of people to guard every road and woodland area to make sure people are not traveling between states illegal, against illicit trade. So to sneak past the borders, to not pay the pesky state taxes. And who in time will infallibly spring up out of the necessities of revenue. So this is what Hamilton spoke about in his last paper, number 12. 11 and 12, he spoke about revenue. So there will be problems with raising money. By revenue, he means money for the government to spend, essentially taxation. So anger will spring up between the different states because they need these police forces making sure there's no illegal trade, and because they're having trouble raising money to keep themselves financed. And if we also take into view the military establishments, which it has been shown would unavoidably result from jealousies and conflicts of the several nations, which they would be divided. So as I was saying just now, John Jay covered this to a great extent, and Hamilton covered it a little bit. If there are separate nations, there would be, they call them jealousies and conflicts. Basically, skirmishes. There would be reasons for war to break out. What they had mentioned in the papers is like Europe, when you live so close to your neighbor and you don't have the same government, eventually you end up going to war for one reason or another. So if we look at all these things, we'll clearly discover that separation would not be less injurious to the economy than to the tranquility, revenue, and liberty of every part. So, this paper he focused on the economy and making it how bad it's going to hurt the economy, kind of. Tranquility is peace, which John Jay talked about. Commerce and revenue, he's spoken about earlier. Liberty has never been brought up. This is the first time they brought this up. The liberty of every part. So, Publius, a very strange paper. It's published the day after his last one, so he obviously wrote it in haste. Just to recap what we just read. Oh, Hamilton. He goes through, he talks again about, it's a really bad idea for us to split up into 13 separate nations. It's also a bad idea for those 13 separate nations to split up into 3 or 4 separate confederacies, and by the way, it'll probably only be 3 confederacies, and by the way, if that happens, it's really only going to be 2 confederacies, and by the way, all those separate confederacies are going to have a constitution just like the exact one we want you to accept right now. Kind of at a loss for words. It just seems so pointless, this whole paper, if I'm being quite honest with you, because that's what he said. If anyone joining us late, that's what he said this whole time. Go back and look. He goes into detail about why New York will join New England, and Jersey will join New York, and Pennsylvania will join the North, and then the South will join its own thing. And that's it. That's the whole point of this entire paper. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you had a fun time here. Like I said, this one's short. I was going to do 2 in a row, but the next one's kind of long, so I didn't want to spend too much time on that. Before we go, button here and pop up. Still getting used to my new setup. Anyone who's watching, if you type, anyone who's watching live, that is, if you type !continent, did you spell it right? Continentals, and hit enter. it will tell you how many points you earned for watching live. Because whenever you watch a live video now, as long as I remember to pull up the chat bot, which I did real quick at the beginning, I forgot at the beginning, it'll add up points. And we use those points on Fridays when we play trivia, starting last week. It's a new thing. It's fun. And if you're new here, this is the first video you're watching, well, check out Trivia on Fridays. Like and subscribe. I have more Continentals than anyone because I've been watching. I use it when I'm setting things up. So that is it for tonight. We are going to do number 14 tomorrow. It's a little bit longer. It will be a little bit more poignant, I guess you can say. I see a lot of people have left during the conversation because this is one of the most beat Federalist papers. It's kind of pointless. He's arguing for the third time. He's arguing a point that no one else is trying to make. It's simply straight down the line propaganda. So, sorry for wasting your time, but blame Alexander Hamilton. I will be back with another Founder for you tomorrow morning, as always, and another Federalist paper tomorrow afternoon, number 14. I look forward to seeing you there. And it didn't work. Okay. Bye.